Welcome to Lighting the Void. I'm your host, Joe Roop, and this is the Thursday, February 2nd edition of the broadcast, and we are coming to you live from the woods of Arkansas. I'm broadcasting you from Arkansas. We broadcast also on KTLK, The Fringe FM, and you can check us out live there and on TuneIn at KTLK, The Fringe FM, or at lightingthevoid.com, iTunes Radio. We're everywhere, man. If you want to call in, you don't want to use your data, we got the answer for you. If you just want to listen and not use your cell phone data if you're riding down the road, you can use our Audio Now line at 563-999-3921 and listen to the show. Tonight, we're going to be talking about a really cool subject, miraculous experiences doctors are hesitant to share with their patients or anyone. And Dr. Scott J. Kolbaba is going to be on with us, and it is going to be pretty cool because I, have talked to a lot of different guests, and you guys, I want a scientific view from this point of view, and who better to trust than a doctor's word, right? I mean, I have never had a doctor steer me wrong in any way, form, or fashion in my life, so this is going to be great. And he's got a wonderful book out, and we're going to talk about that. I didn't even check today. Oh, yeah, by the way, our website, lightingthevoid.com, Facebook is facebook.com/lightingthevoid, and we're going to do the chat room on hashtag LTV Radio. I'm going to try this Twitter chat thing out since everybody else on the network is doing it, and I want to wish a big happy birthday to a big supporter of ours, Deb Cruz. You're it. What a wonderful smile you have. I hope this birthday has been wonderful for you, and we really do thank you for all your support. So happy birthday. And tomorrow night, we're going to have Chad C. Meek back on. We're going to talk about that, the Van Tassel story and some of the stuff that we've got coming up. Don't forget to sign up to the newsletter on the website. There's a newsletter on The Fringe as well, and there's even a chat room in there. You people need to learn how to play nice in that chat room. If you go in there, just be friendly or whatever, but I would rather you come over here. Hashtag LTV Radio. If you got tweet chat or anything like that, you just put a hashtag and LTV Radio on Twitter, and bam, it goes right into the chat room. Pretty cool, huh? So, other than that, we got the Ozark Paranormal event we're going to be doing in April. And you guys, we're going to do this is what we got planned. So I know that I've been talking about an official network launch, and I believe that's where we're going to do it. We're going to do giveaways, and we're going to try to get, all of the speakers that are coming out there on the air and have you guys call in and stuff. And that's a 3-day event. That's going to be in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. And it's going to be awesome. And if you can come out to it and give us a visit. We'd love that. We'd love to have you out there. Some of you guys I forgot to mention on the last episode on Facebook, too. I'm so sorry. Let me ask you guys a real quick question, and I want you to see where I'm going with this one, okay? And yes, I'm behind when it comes to this stuff, but did Darth Vader really say, Luke, I am your father? Or is this Mandela effect just some kind of fluke? Because I remember him saying that, and I'm just putting it out there. I know it's off the subject, but a buddy of mine, Jeff, he does a lot of investigations for me, and he called me up and started showing me this stuff, and I'm halfway convinced. So if you guys got a good guest or someone that can convince me to go on that side, let me know. You can hit me up at contact@lightingthevoid. And, I would love to talk about that subject, the Mandela effect. I am not, I'm not a flat earth guy, but I am kind of in the middle on that one. Okay, so when we come back, we're going to have Dr. Scott J. Kolbaba on, and we're going to talk about miraculous experiences doctors are hesitant to share with their patients, or anyone for that matter. So stick around. We'll be right back. All right. Thanks for sticking around, folks. I appreciate that. All right, so let's get on with it. Let's bring our guest on here. Tonight, we are going to delve into the realm of medicine, and we are going to talk to Dr. Scott J. Kolbaba. He is an established physician in private practice for over 25 years in Wheaton, Illinois. And his book, Physicians' Untold Stories, other physicians are on this book too, by the way. But this book, Physicians' Untold Stories, there's almost 30 physicians on here. They have stories of miraculous experiences doctors are hesitant to share with their patients or anyone. It's a must-read for the seeker of truth and anyone looking for evidence of an afterlife or divine intervention. His Chicago Magazine top doc, as rated by his colleagues and peers, and an AOA honors graduate from the University of Illinois College of Medicine. He completed his residency training at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. He treats every patient as a respected friend, is what they're saying. He is excited about helping his patients chart a course to healthy lifestyle with strong emphasis on preventative medicine. He also has a strong belief in family and is proud of each of his 7 children. In addition to his family duties, he has been involved in promoting adoption, Newfoundland dogs, and family travel. And I'm talking about a rap sheet of stuff here that he's got, different degrees from Cornell College, bachelor's, looks like a BA in honors in economics, MD degree with honors, elected to Alpha Honor Medical Society, and he was in the Marine Corps too. So we're talking about a man with integrity here, and a doctor at that too. And we're going to talk about some stuff that happens in the medical field that doctors really are hesitant to talk about. And I've got a copy of this book right here, and I got to say, I've just started delving into it, Doc, and what made you want to write this book? That's what I'm really interested in. What got you wanting to write this?
Joseph, thanks for having me on. And I'm a doctor. I love my practice. I take care of all kinds of different things in my practice. I'm a general internist. But I had a few experiences that were really, really strange and really bizarre. And it got me thinking about whether other doctors had those experiences too. And about that time, as a matter of fact, let me tell you a story that initially got me interested. A fellow that was traveling to Arkansas, interestingly. Okay. He had what sounded like a gallbladder attack in Arkansas. He was traveling on business, and he called me up and said, I've got this pain in my abdomen. I'm nauseated. I just had finished a large meal, and I said, it sounds just like a gallbladder. Why don't you go to the emergency room and have them check you out? So he did, and they called me from the ER a couple hours later and said everything was normal. Gallbladder ultrasound, lab test, x-rays, everything was perfectly normal. So I said, well, when you come back into Chicago, give me a call. We'll get together and see what's going on. So he came back, and he was still having the pain. And I did some fancier blood tests and scans and things, and everything came out perfectly normal. It was really troubling. And a couple days later, I woke up in the morning with this strange feeling that I needed a lung scan. Now, this is a guy with abdominal pain, nausea. It sounded all like a GI problem and not so much a lung problem. But I couldn't get that thought out of my mind. It was really bizarre. So I called him up. Normally, my nurse would do that and schedule things. And I called him up and I said, listen, Taylor, I've had this feeling that you needed a lung scan. And if I could order it today, would you get it in? And he said, no, I can't, because I'm flying out to Denver this afternoon. I've got to pack and everything else. And the feeling was so strong that I said to him, I really feel strongly that you should have this. And I almost was embarrassed to say that, because there was no reason he needed a lung scan. He needed something more for the abdomen or the GI tract. So he finally said, okay, if you can get it in early this morning, I'll go along with it. So I called the x-ray department, and they laughed at me for wanting to get it in the morning, but they finally agreed, and they said, send him right over. About 2 hours later, I got a call from the radiologist, and he said, it's a good call. And I said, what do you mean? He said he had a massive pulmonary embolus, a blood clot, in his lung that was sitting on his diaphragm, which is why he had abdominal pain, not chest pain. Had he flown out that day, he probably would have died, because he would have had another blood clot, very likely, from the plane trip, which is what caused the first plane trip on his trip to Arkansas. And we put him right in the hospital. We discovered he had a hereditary clotting disorder that predisposed him to have blood clots, and he's been on blood thinners ever since. And after I had that experience, my antennas were perked up for other things that happen to other doctors, and I wondered if something like this happened on a regular basis. And after talking to a few doctors, I heard some absolutely phenomenal stories like that, and I thought maybe I should think about writing these down. And doctors are like barbers. We have patients that do everything. We have patients that are plumbers and roofers and dentists, and I have a publisher in my practice. And so I called him up and I said, listen, I've got a couple stories I'd like to run by you to see if you think they're worth publishing or if they're just I should give up this crazy idea and continue to practice and forget about writing.
Right.
And so he said, that's fine. So we had a lunch. And I was telling him the stories. I was pretty hungry at this lunch, and I was looking down at my food more than anything else. And I told him about 2 or 3 stories, and then I looked up. He had tears in his eyes. And he said, you have to publish these stories. They're amazing stories. And I didn't realize that, and I was really touched when I saw that. And that's what got me started, and I thought this would be a nice 6-month project. But it turned out to be about 4 years. But I finally finished it, and I got many, many stories from doctors. The ones I included, Joe, are the ones that made me tear up or give me goosebumps. And those are the ones I put in the book.
All right. Yeah, there's quite a few in here, and it's it's really written well too. I just got the book. I haven't had a chance to read it all, but I got a feeling I'm going to be passing this around to my family members and stuff after I get done. Because, my grandmother, she's fighting cancer, and Dad's a diabetic. Everybody's got something, and it seems pretty daunting, sometimes with all this stuff. You see it on the TV, all these diseases, all this cancer. It's like, where's the light at the end of the tunnel other than taking a pill, And
yeah.
This book is exactly what I've been looking for on this show. It's not, we talk about a lot of paranormal stuff, a lot of different things, but this is the real deal here. I mean, there's so many stories, and I'm sure there's plenty of stories on here that you probably just didn't put in the book.
That's for sure, Joe. There were a number of stories that I heard from doctors, and most doctors that have been in practice for a while have some stories. And like I said, I just put the most significant ones. There are lots and lots of stories out there. And, it's interesting. You mentioned, people that are having troubles and medical issues and so forth. I wrote the book keeping those people in mind that, this is a hard life. There's some tough stuff out there. And I think this book gives people hope that there's something else. And, when you write a book like this, and it's just a book, an anthology of just stories, and you never know quite what the bottom line is when you first start because you have a whole series of stories. And I think the bottom line came out to be there's something else out there. There's a God. There's most of the doctors call it God. You can call it what you want. And there's something out there that looks over us and helps us out and loves us unconditionally. I think when you know that or feel that or believe that, it helps get you through this tough life. And that's why one of the reasons I wrote the book. It's also interesting to me when I tell stories to people, and I'm always a little behind in my office hours because I love to tell these stories to my patients.
Sure.
And when I told one of my patients, one of the stories, and it's interesting the response that people have when they hear these stories. And one of the things that they come back with is, I thought that was a coincidence that happened to me, but it really wasn't. It must have been something else. I had a guy the other day that told me he had a daughter that was trying to do an internship in New York. She had a 3-month internship in whatever course she was studying. And she couldn't find an apartment in New York because they were too expensive. And so she'd had to give up her internship. And he felt really bad about that because he couldn't afford the apartment cost. So that night he had a dream about a person that he hadn't seen for maybe 20 years. And it was a pretty emotional dream. And the next day, interestingly, that fellow called him up. And he said, I've missed you. I haven't talked with you for about 20 years. But I wanted to tell you that I've been a very successful businessman. I'm living in downtown New York. I have a big apartment with 3 bedrooms. I'm bouncing off the walls because no one's here. And I have no company. And I've retired. I've made it really big. And my patient said, well, my daughter's looking for a place to stay. Do you think she might be able to stay with you? And he said, absolutely. Have her give me a call. And it turns out that they hit it off really well. She stayed in one of the bedrooms, did her internship, and he thought that was just a coincidence, that would happen like that. But I think there's more to it than that. And I think many people have coincidences that they just write off as coincidental, but they really aren't. And I think there's amazing things happening to us all the time, all around us. If we realize that, I think it makes life a little easier and gives you some hope for the future.
Yeah, we talk about synchronicities here a lot, and it's a word you hear a lot, law of attraction and stuff like
right.
that, synchronicity, vibration, and it sounds kind of foo-foo-y and everything. But here's the thing. After so many coincidences, I mean, it can't be a coincidence.
Right.
It can't be after a while. Now, do you find that all of these things that happen that you wrote about, do they all seem to work in the way of coincidence? Or have you actually witnessed like a real, like, hey, this thing is just gone? I don't know why, but it's gone, right?
Well, there's a lot of coincidences, but there are some things that I wrote about that are really, really strange and that you can't explain just by coincidence. I can give you a couple examples if you want.
Sure.
There was a physician that was skiing with his wife and his wife's sister in Colorado. And he's an expert skier, and so is his wife and his wife's sister. So they go to these rugged mountains, the triple black diamonds, and they were on a mountain they've never skied before in Colorado. They got up to the top of the mountain on the ski lift, and when they got off, a blizzard hit, and the temperature dropped, and the wind started to blow, and the snow was coming down so hard that they could hardly see anything in front of them. But they had to ski down the mountain. So they started to ski down the mountain, and they came to a fork in the path. There was a big grove of trees in the middle, and they had to go to the right or the left. And the surgeon, Dr. Heim, went to the right, and the girls happened to go to the left, and they didn't realize that until a couple seconds after they made that decision. And so Dr. Heim, who's an expert skier, decided to go through the woods and round, connect up with the girls again. Hmm. While he was doing that, he suddenly had this strange sensation in his chest, like something dreadful was happening, that he was being called to do something of a life and death proportion. And everything became quiet. It was just silent. Despite the wind blowing and the snow coming down, it was so quiet that he could hear the crunch of the snow under his skis. And he stopped skiing. He had no idea why he stopped skiing. He just stopped skiing right in the middle of this grove of trees, and he couldn't see where the girls were. He knew they were on the other side, and they were waiting for him, actually. And so he took off his skis and stood there for a minute, and then he decided to climb up the mountain again in the opposite direction from where the girls were waiting. He had no idea why he was climbing up the mountain. He was climbing and walking and climbing and walking, and the trees were pretty good-sized pine trees. And, when you have about 5 feet of snow, there's a thing called a tree well, which is where the snow comes down to the base of the tree and forms like a big bowl.
Right.
And he came to a big tree about maybe 50 yards or so from where he stopped skiing. And then he stood there for a second and looked down, and then he realized what he was called to do. There was a body underneath the tree, covered in snow. He brushed off his face. Now, Dr. Heim is a trauma surgeon, too. What better person to come across a person in trouble in the wilderness than a trauma surgeon?
So this wasn't a dead body? This was somebody there suffering, right?
Well, he didn't know. He didn't know yet. So he brushed off his head, and he had a gray face and didn't look like he was breathing. But being a trauma surgeon, he reached for his neck for the carotid artery, and he had a pulse.
Yeah.
So he was alive. He was just barely alive because the pulse was very weak. So he went into trauma mode. He brushed off all the snow from his body. He covered him with his 2 jackets. He started yelling for help, help. One of the last skiers down the mountain happened to hear his cry for help, and he came to his side and said, "What can I do?" Dr. Heim said, "Go down to the nearest phone and call the ski patrol." So about 25 minutes later, he saw the light from the ski patrol snowmobile and a gurney being pulled behind the snowmobile, and they came and picked the hypothermic shocky skier up and put him on the gurney and took him back to the lodge where the ambulance was waiting to take him back to the hospital. And so Dr. Heim then, was all of the adrenaline was out, and he was shivering like crazy. Put his jackets back on, and quickly skied back to where the girls were. And they skied down the mountain to where he was given his reward, a cup of hot chocolate.
Oh my gosh.
The next day, he called up the hospital and said, "What happened to that guy that was in the woods that I found?" And they said, "He's perfectly fine. He's awake. He's alert. He was hypothermic. We had to do a lot of resuscitation, but he's now doing really fine." And Dr. Heim happened to splint his leg, since he's an orthopedic surgeon too, with some of his underclothes and a tree branch. And they were impressed with the splinting of the guy's leg, which was broken.
Wow.
And when Dr. Heim told me that story, he said, if you don't believe that there's something else above us that directs traffic, after an experience like that, you don't believe in anything. He was visibly moved. He's not a religious person, but he could recognize there was something else going on. That wasn't a coincidence. That was just something that he was directed to do, and he did it. And if he didn't do that, the guy wouldn't have been found probably till the spring, because he was already covered with snow, and he would have been buried in snow in an hour.
That's crazy. So he just had like what we call a premonition. Something told him that something was wrong. Looked down, and there's a person there, probably hit a tree, and is just suffering. And he just, how easily, if he didn't have that subtle premonition, would he have skied right by that guy?
Yeah. And, I think we get subtle premonitions sometimes. I think the premonition that he had was someone yelling at him pretty much. This was a wrong premonition. And, all of us have premonitions to do some things. And some are subtle, some are little voices, and some are really loud. I think the premonition that he had was probably as loud as you can get. He just couldn't help himself what he was doing. He just had to do it.
Right. That's amazing.
It is.
By the way, the call-in number is 831-777-8643. If you guys want to call in, don't be shy. He'll be happy to answer any of your questions, but you can also chat with us at, hashtag LTV Radio on Twitter. Now, you, why do you think that nearly 30 ordinary physicians, just regular practicing physicians in all different specialties, risk their reputations to come forward with these stories, other than just you writing the book?
I've given that a lot of thought, because, these are regular docs. These are docs that aren't doing alternative medicine things. They're just regular straight arrow, docs that are practicing orthopedics and surgery and neurology and medicine. And, when you have a bizarre story like this, you can be criticized. If a person found out that, one of the docs was having visions or dreams or things like that, they could lose patients. They could be seriously criticized. So I thought for a long time, why would these docs allow me to publish their amazing stories? I came up with a couple reasons. Number one, I've been in practice a long time in the area, and everyone knows me. They know I'm a reasonable kind of a guy, and would not alter their story or exaggerate or anything like that. And I think that was one of the things. The other thing, I think, was that there are so many doctors that came forward with stories that they all felt some camaraderie. And if it was just one or two doctors, that'd be one thing. But almost 30 doctors in our area, I think lent itself a little bit of credibility, and I think they felt that they could come forward with a story if half the other doctors had stories too that they knew. But the real reason, I think, is that doctors, I call them this in the book, I call them sappy do-gooders. Doctors love to do good in the world. They love to get up in the morning and help someone, to save a life, to do whatever they can do to make someone's life a little bit easier. When you go to medical school, when you try to get into medical school, they have on the form that you fill out an essay about why you want to be a doc. And most of the doctors say, I want to cure the cancer and save the world and help people and so forth. And you know what? They still believe that. And I think one of the things that when they came forward with these stories that they wanted to do was they wanted to give people hope in this world. They wanted to make people realize there's something else. There is a God. There is a force, whatever you want to call it, that looks out for us and that helps us in the things that we do. And I think that was the overarching idea that they had, that they would be helping other people by coming forward with these stories, even at the expense of losing some patients or being criticized for having such an unusual experience.
Now, a friend of mine well, my ex-wife's friend, which I consider she's a friend of mine too. Probably the most healthiest person I've ever met. You know, runs, eats healthy, and everything. Ends up with cancer, and you know, you see a lot of times when people have cancer patients, they got all these different treatments, but I wonder how much confidence, prayer, and just all about good vibes actually helps them through that process.
Well, you know, there were a number of doctors that told me stories about prayer and confidence and things like that. And one of those was actually the chairman of the board of one of our local colleges here, Wheaton College. It's a big Christian school. And he had an experience when he was younger that he was playing soccer. He was the goalie, and one of the forwards was coming toward him, kicking the ball, and they missed the ball, and he turned his back a little bit toward the forward, and they kicked him right in the flank, right where the kidney is, and he ruptured his kidney. Can you imagine how painful that would be?
Well, I just had a kidney stone, and if it's any more painful than that, I cannot imagine the pain. No,
it's more painful than that. It was really painful. Oh my gosh! So he was put in the hospital right away, and he had blood in the urine, and he had a lot of pain, and he was in so much pain for a couple of days that all he could do was just get pain medication. He didn't even watch TV; just watch the clock. And that was about a Tuesday that he went into the hospital, and the urologist decided that next week he'd have to take his kidney out because he wasn't getting any better, surgery. Oh my gosh. So they were getting ready to do that, and along came Friday, and he was doing the same thing he always did, watch the clock, and he was in bed watching the clock on the wall, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. At 10 o'clock exactly, something happened. The pain disappeared. He sat up in bed a little bit to kind of test it out, and no pain. Leaned to the left, leaned to the right, was afraid to even move because he thought the pain might come back. No pain at all. He stood up, walked around the room, pain totally gone, went to the bathroom, no blood in the urine, was perfectly fine. The doctor sent him home the next day. He recovered at home. And eventually, he went back to school, and it was interesting that he had a very, very favorite teacher. And the teacher was talking to him, and he said, you know, we really, really missed you here at school, all of your friends, and all the teachers were really concerned about you. And we were so concerned that on that Friday, after you had the accident, we decided to get together at passing hour to say a faculty prayer. And Dr. Geezer said, what time was that? 10 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, my goodness. Crazy.
Isn't that crazy?
Well, I mean, you hear about this stuff all the time from people, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, the doctors couldn't believe it. This happened, and I hear it, and I'm thinking, oh, there has to have been a medical explanation, right? And
sure.
But to hear it from a doctor's point, it's saying the same thing. I mean, it's just amazing. I mean, I'm sure there is a medical explanation. I'm sure it did happen, probably like a coincidence, but there's no doubt that's divine intervention. That, to me, there's no doubt about it.
And he believes that too. And he said that's strengthened his faith and kept him on the path, the path of religion all of his life after that experience.
Okay, all right. So, well, you mentioned that one of the doctors, when in training, always had a fluttering light, either in a dream or during the day when someone on their service was going to die. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, that was very interesting and a little bit spooky to her. This is Noemi Sigalov, who is a surgeon that actually escaped communism in Romania and came to this country. And she went to medical school here. And when during her residency, which is a real tough residency, and, you know, the surgeons in the inner city have lots and lots of really sick people, gunshots and all kinds of things that are, you know, really, really life-threatening. And they would regularly have people on their service die from all these complications, train accidents and car accidents and so forth. And, you know, she would see this fluttering light off to the side of her vision. And we see that with migraine headaches, but she didn't have migraine headaches. And whenever she would see this fluttering light, and sometimes it would be at nighttime in a dream, it would be sometimes when she had first gotten up in the morning, was in the shower or getting dressed or whatever, she would know that someone on their service was going to die. And they had a morning meeting. Whenever you are in residency, you have a morning meeting with the residents to discuss the cases and so forth. And everyone would dread hearing whether or not she had a fluttering vision. And she would say, "I had that fluttering vision again." And everyone would say, "Oh no," and they'd know someone was going to die. And invariably, that would happen. And that lasted for her whole residency for several years. And then it just disappeared. And it was really uncanny and bizarre that would happen. But and she couldn't explain it, and I can't explain it.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, though. I mean, that's all. I don't even really know what to say about some of this stuff because I can talk all day long about UFOs and paranormal things and stuff like that. But I mean, again, I'm going to say this: every day we watch TV, we're blasted by the media. What we see, Doc, is diseases more and more, and I don't know if it's the media, I don't know what it is, but if you just watch TV and that's all you do, you see a lot of pain and suffering out there, and you don't see commercials about your book. You don't see anything like that. You just see, here, take this medicine if you got this disease, so many people died and stuff. Really, I'm glad you wrote this book because I'm sure you don't have to. I'm sure you didn't have to, but this message really needs to get out to people. A lot of people need to see this and hear this.
And that's what I thought. I thought and that's what these doctors thought too. They risked their reputations to bring these stories to people, to give them some hope that medicine does sometimes work without medications. And there are funny things that happen out there. There's another story about one of the gynecologists that actually delivered one of our kids. Mike Hussey is his name, and Mike was also a sappy do-gooder. He liked to travel around the world to the poorest of the poor countries and do surgeries. And they routinely went to the Philippines. And in the Philippines, he's the gynecologist, so he would operate on women that had all kinds of things, cancers and all kinds of gynecologic problems that needed surgery. And some of these women would wait for years for the surgical team to come because they couldn't afford to have medical care in our country. And they would line up for blocks when the surgical team came. And one of the girls, Marie was her name, had a very enlarged uterus from tangles of muscle. It's called fibroids. And she looked like she was pregnant. And she was a young girl in her 20s, and all this huge burden that she had that was walking around like she was pregnant. And so he agreed to operate on her and take the uterus out. And while he was doing that, she finally made it to surgery. And this is a small hospital. This is an 8-bed hospital in the backwoods of the Philippines. And the nearest blood bank and support was like 25 miles away. And he was the only surgeon in the hospital. There weren't even any nurses at the time. There were just techs that would help him with the surgery. So he was operating on her, and when he opened her up, he realized that everything was matted down from scar tissue. Mm-hmm. And normally what they have to do in surgery is they have to lift the uterus up to get to the blood vessels that they tie off so there's no bleeding. Well, because of all this scar tissue, he couldn't lift the uterus up, and she started to bleed. And she bled more and more and more. Normally, he'd be tying off the blood vessels to prevent that. And he was trying to stop the bleeding, and he realized he couldn't stop the bleeding. And all of a sudden, everything in the operating room became really quiet. When you have a disaster potentially like that, everyone, is quiet. They don't look you in the eye. And he knew he was in big trouble because he was timing how long it would take her to literally bleed to death, because he couldn't get to the blood vessels to tie off, and he couldn't stop the bleeding fast enough to prevent her from bleeding to death. And so he didn't know what to do. And here he is, alone, 2,000, I don't know how many thousands of miles from home in the backwoods of the Philippines, and losing this young girl as he watched her become more and more pale. And so he closed his eyes and he said a prayer. He said, "Heavenly Father, you're the ultimate healer. This is your patient. Please take over and help." He opened his eyes. He was a little startled by the light, the surgical light, because he had his eyes closed for a little bit. And something amazing and miraculous happened. The scar tissue seemed to melt away. He was able to lift the uterus up he was able to tie off the blood vessels. The bleeding was stopped, and he saved her life. He ultimately went on and did the surgery, and she recovered. She was a little weak for a while, but she recovered. And he realized then that, there's something to this, the power of prayer in medicine. And he prays for his patients, and he recommends that anyone that's in real serious trouble can call on a higher force than us, and he believes it's God that saved this girl. It's Marie.
There ain't no doubt about it there. When a doctor reaches out for help, who else can help? You got to. That's a really inspiring story, and I'm glad to hear that. I'm sure that makes all of us feel a lot better. Nobody wants to know they're under surgery and the doctor's praying for help, right? You don't want to know that, but the fact that it worked, it's kind of bittersweet. It's really good. Yeah. It's awesome. Now, I know we might have touched on this earlier, but I'm really curious because you're a general practitioner, you're a doctor, you got 7 kids. I'm sure your schedule is swamped to the core, right? So so you had to have some kind of experience. Did you have any experiences that you could explain scientifically that started you on this path to this book that made you want to write it with this busy schedule?
Well, I had an experience on vacation that got me thinking about these kinds of issues. I went to Cape Cod, and all of our kids love to go to Cape Cod. And it was just one of those perfect times. It was a beautiful day. We had a wonderful time. We have 7 kids, and all the kids came with the grandkids and the spouses and so forth. And it was one of those days that you just had to pinch yourself. It was so perfect. The sun was setting. The kids were playing in the yard. The girls were talking. The boys were cooking. And on vacation we had the boys cook. And this was our favorite vacation spot near the beach. And when the boys got the food, we went to the local Stop and Shop store. We bought swordfish steaks and corn on the cob and baked potatoes. And we like to eat, things that we don't normally eat at home, obviously. And then there was a big stack of pies there. And we needed 5 pies for the family because that's how many people there were. And they were cherry pies. There was a whole stack of them. And while we were checking out, the boys started talking about their favorite pies. And my mother used to make a rhubarb pie, and it was really incredibly good. She used to add probably more sugar than she needed to. It was really, really sweet. We had a big rhubarb plant in the backyard, and when at the end of the season, she'd go out and pick all the rhubarb stalks and make rhubarb pie. And when we go back home with my kids, we would sneak. I'm sure she knew we were sneak into the kitchen with all spoons, and we wouldn't even put any plates out or anything else. We'd go right to the pan and eat the rhubarb pie right out of the pan. It was absolutely incredible. And we got to talking on the vacation about how my mother, she had died, before that, and how my mother would have loved to have been on vacation with us. And, if she was on vacation, I bet she would have made a rhubarb pie for us. And we had a lot of fun talking about that and how special that night was with all the family there, and everyone was having a grand time. And we finished our dinner, and my wife got out the cherry pie and cut it and served each of us a piece of cherry pie. And I put my fork in and put it in my mouth, and I got goosebumps up and down my back.
Uh-oh.
The pie wasn't cherry; it was rhubarb.
Oh.
Now I looked at the box, and the box said cherry pie. And this was clearly rhubarb pie. And I think you can probably come up with all kinds of logical explanations. Maybe at the factory they substituted the rhubarb pie for a cherry pie or something. Mm-hmm. But to me, I knew my mother was there with us, enjoying that incredible family time.
Yeah, and you could say that was right. You could say that was a coincidence. Highly doubt it. Isn't that weird how that stuff works, though? Like it has to work through this reality in a way that makes sense in this reality, but it's not. It's like a weird matrix. It's not a coincidence. I've had that kind of stuff happen to me too. And
I think everyone has. And I think the point of this book is that everyone should pay attention to those kinds of coincidences or those kinds of things, because I think they do happen. And that's what Joe. That's what first got me really thinking about this the book and the kinds of things that we could put in this book that would help people in this life.
Yeah, and you mentioned in your book that obviously we toss around the word love a lot, but maybe we don't really understand what love is and how powerful this thing is. I mean, you mentioned in your book that it is the most powerful force in the universe. Did any of the other doctors demonstrate this or talk to you about that?
Yeah, I think, again, that's probably one of the main themes of the book is love, and love for family, love for others. And there's an interesting story about one of the obstetricians in the area. His name is Dr. Heitzler, Jack Heitzler, and his wife, Joan, was delivering their 5th child. And they have, I think, 8 children, more than us. We've got 7. I think they beat us. And when she was delivering the child, she had some problems. And her grandmother, who loved her dearly, came into the room and saved her life. And the history of that goes back to Grandma Hanlon is her name, and she grew up in Ireland. And during the time that she grew up, the Catholics and the Protestants were fighting. And Grandma Hanlon was Catholic, and her father used to hide the priests in secret rooms in their house. And he recognized that this was a dangerous time and sent little Grandma Hanlon, if she was a child at the time, or a teenager, to this country to grow up. And Grandma Hanlon then became a midwife and was delivering lots of babies, and she would stay with the mother for about 6 weeks to help with all the aftercare and so forth. And she sometimes, when the mother couldn't pay, Grandma Hanlon would work for nothing. She was that kind of a spiritual leader. She'd even, when she would go downtown in Chicago on the train, she would find people that were, begging for food or money or something, and she'd give them money, and everyone would laugh at her for giving this street person some money, and because they would just buy alcohol with it. And she said, God wants me to do this, and to give them the money to help them out. What they do with the money is up to them.
Yeah, maybe they won't buy alcohol with it. You never know. Maybe they'll get inspired and go buy a meal or something,
That was her point. So Grandma Hanlon finally got a little older, and she had to live with Joan Heitzler's mother. And so she was in the same house as Joan, and she formed an incredible, loving relationship with Joan, the woman that was delivering the baby. And so Joan and Grandma Hanlon had a very phenomenal, loving relationship. And when Joan said she got in trouble when she was a kid, if she could make it to Grandma Hanlon's lap, she would be safe. She'd know she would be safe. Well, Joan was now delivering her 5th child, and when she was starting to have some pain, one of the things that they did in those days was they used a drug called trilene, and it's a anesthetic that they put by mask over the mouth, and so the woman goes into falls asleep. Basically, it's a deep sleep. And she delivered the baby, but she was having some pain afterwards, and they decided to use this trilene. So they were getting the trilene ready, and were almost ready to put the mask over her mouth, and that's when Grandma Hanlon stepped into the room, and she stood at the foot of the bed. She was dressed in a white dress with little tiny blue polka dots, and she had a white sweater vest, and her hair was up in a bun, and she had little old lady shoes. And she shook her head to Joan, "Don't take this trilene. Don't do it." So Joan pushed the trilene away, and she was able to suffer through the rest of the procedure. And Joan says that this event probably saved her life because no one realized that Joan had eaten a large meal right before she went into labor. And after she pushed the trilene away, about a minute later, she vomited the entire meal up. Had she been asleep, she vomited that and aspirated and may have died as a result of that. So Joan's comment was that she made it to Grandma Hanlon's lap one more time, their love having transcended all time and space because Grandma Hanlon had died 22 years before.
Wow. That's pretty amazing.
It is amazing. The power of love is unbelievable. Unbelievable. I think it's the most powerful force in the universe.
I definitely agree with you on that. I wish I could understand it more. A lot of people say, well, you're doing all this stuff. You're never going to understand these things. But, I wouldn't trade the awareness or the consciousness that I have now on this search and this radio program than I had 10 years ago. I've been learning so many different things about this, and this is validates it even more. Did any of the doctors, I want to talk about dreams for a little bit. Do you think that
Sure.
that dreams are just a flop of the brain, or do you think that they do actually mean something? They are, something is trying to tell you something in people's dreams.
I think we have both. I think we have just some ordinary routine dreams that don't mean very much. But then, some of the doctors came forward with some amazing dreams that really were, I think, a premonition of something to happen. Let me give you an example. Dr. Rich Jorgensen, who's a very prominent local surgeon, who's had to give up surgery now actually because of an allergy to plastics in the operating room. But he tells a story about a dream he had about one of his good friends who was a appellate judge. And the dream was very, very vivid. He dreamt that he saw him in a coffin, dead from a heart attack. And he saw the people filing into the funeral home, and it was an incredibly moving dream. And, when you wake up in the morning, usually if you have a dream, you think about it for a few seconds, then it's gone, and you go on with your day.
Yeah.
This was a dream he couldn't get out of his mind. And it was interesting, about a month or two before that, he was having coffee with a person that was telling him about some of the things that the Indians believe, American Indians. And he was saying that the Indians believe that if you dream about a person, you need to tell them, because that's the earth spirit telling you something that that person needs to know. So Rich thought about that, and he thought, I've got to tell this judge, my best friend, about this dream. And so he called him up, and you can imagine what kind of a strange conversation that was. Hello, Judge. I just want to let you know I had a dream that you were dead. And the judge laughed a little bit and said, that was quite a dream, Rich. What do you want me to do about it? And Dr. Jorgensen said, I'd like you to go get a physical. And he hadn't had a physical for a long time. So he went to see his doctor. He got a total physical, EKG, lab work, chest x-ray, everything. Everything was perfectly normal. It's interesting that the doctor that had examined him said, don't listen to this surgeon anymore. He doesn't know, anything about medicine, and you're not going to die. Don't worry about that. Well, when Dr. Jorgensen heard that, he was a little miffed, first of all. But what really went through his mind was, this sick feeling. How you get that sick feeling that, he still believed that there was something really seriously wrong, that he had to convince the judge to do something more. And he said, would you just do me a favor and go to see my cardiologist? So he finally agreed after much arm twisting. Now, Dr. Jorgensen felt a little bad about this because, if he was wrong, he would be embarrassed that he was sending him to all these doctors. But the judge had a treadmill stress test, which he failed very badly, was admitted to the hospital for an angiogram. The angiogram was so abnormal, he had what's called a widowmaker, plus many other coronary blockages that would have killed him very likely within the next 3 to 6 months. The life expectancy of a person with a major widowmaker, which is a left main coronary blockage, is about 6 months. And so they didn't even let him go from the hospital. They did the bypass surgery the next day and literally saved his life. And had he not done that, he would have died for sure. So that dream was really a premonition of something that was really, really true. And, Dr. Jorgensen accepts that, and the judge thanked him for literally saving his life and pursuing, that premonition.
So I've had those dreams before, and I think you're right. I mean, I've had dreams about bad things happening to my family members, and, it was a death dream, but, like my uncle, I had a dream he died, and it wasn't a few days later he had a stroke, so maybe we ought to listen to that a little bit more. Same thing with my dad. I had a really bad feeling about something as soon as I woke up in the morning. The same feeling you were talking about, the skier had, right? The doctor. And my grandmother called me and said, well, you better come up here to the gas station. And I was like, why? And she's like, you need to come up here right now. And I knew something was wrong. And, he had pulled out in front of a truck and it crumpled his car, and he had, just so crushed his bones, punctured his liver, cracked his chest plate, almost killed him. And it was just a feeling. I had that feeling the day before. I wonder if there's a way we can start listening to this stuff a little bit more. We've got to. Well,
I think the bottom line of the book is that, people should be listening to those those premonitions, those feelings. Now, not everyone's going to be true, but there are lots of things that we're told, I'm sure, that we can easily ignore in the busyness of life. But I think there's a God up there. There's something, there's a force up there that's telling us some things and looking out for us and telling us some things that might happen to us that we need to look out for.
Right. Now, Dave asked in the hashtag LTV Radio on Twitter, I know we had talked about it earlier, do you have any other coincidences with prayer or any other stories that you'd like to bring up about that?
There's quite a few stories about prayer. I had one myself, which is very interesting. I love to visit my kids in Phoenix. We've got three families that live in Phoenix now, so I can take off on a Friday night from Chicago and visit the kids on Saturday and Sunday and come back Sunday night, and we do that semi-regularly, myself or my wife or sometimes both of us. And this one particular time, I remember I flew to Phoenix, and I had to get back on that Monday because my partner, Dr. Bourne, was going to be going to a cruise in the Caribbean that next morning. So I had to be back because if I wasn't back, no one could cover for him. So I took that weekend, and we had a great time with my family. And as I was walking back to Sky Harbor Airport, which is the big airport in Phoenix, I looked at my ticket because I've never made a mistake on tickets before. I am so compulsive. People laugh at me how compulsive I am. But I'm so compulsive about checking the dates, the times, everything on the airline reservations that we make, because we make quite a few visiting the kids. And when I was walking to the airport, I looked at the ticket, and it said Monday, not Sunday night. And I got this, sudden panic feeling in my chest because I knew if I wasn't back, my partner wouldn't be able to go on vacation.
Right.
So I went to the ticket counter right away, and I said, "Listen, I've got this ticket, and it's the wrong date, and I'm sure you can exchange it." And the ticket counter person said, "No, we can't do it right here. You have to go to the gate." So I got to the gate, and I went up to the counter, and I waited in line. And it was funny because the people in front of me all were trying to fly standby. And so I finally got up to the front, and I said, "I've got this ticket. I need to get home because my partner," and so forth, and told the whole story. And the woman said, "I'm sorry, the plane is filled, and we have 8 people waiting to get on the plane ahead of you. And it's not likely you're going to be flying back home." And that was the last plane of the day. And I just didn't know. I was trying to compose in my mind what I could tell my partner that he had to cancel his vacation. I was just right. Totally distraught.
I don't know how you could tell anybody that.
Right. So then I went back and sat down in the corner of this gate, and then they went on the PA system and they said, "I'm sorry, we have an overflow situation. We are overbooked, and we're offering $300 for anyone that wants to cancel their ticket." And I thought, "Oh no, how can I ever fly home? Not only do they have 8 people ahead of me, but now they've got an oversold situation." And I was desperate, and I kind of put my head down and I said a prayer. I said, "Dear Heavenly Father, I know this is not the most important thing in the world, that there are more important things of life and death implications and so forth, but I really need to get home. Please help me get home tonight." And then amen. And so they then came on the PA system after that and said, "We now have still an oversold situation. We're offering not only $450 per ticket that you give up, but also free flight another time." And so I went up to the ticket counter, and again, 8 people ahead of me, other people giving up their tickets, and they said, "I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to get you on the flight." So I'm standing there with this sad group of 8 people that
I'd be upset. I would be mad, but
Well, I was mad at myself. I was the one that made the mistake. And so the gate opened up. The plane was filled. They were about ready to close the door, to the gate that led to the plane. And the 8 individuals that had standby were walking away, and I decided to join them. And all of a sudden, I hear this little voice, and the voice said, "Mr. Kolbaba, please hurry up and pick up your ticket." I looked back at the ticket counter, and there was one of the attendants holding a boarding pass out, and I sprinted, grabbed the boarding pass like you would a baton in a race, ran to the door just as it was closing and got onto the plane just in time. I don't know how that happened. I wanted to go back and ask the ticket counter how the heck that I was able to get that ticket when they were in an oversold situation, 8 people ahead of me, but I didn't ask. I got on the plane, and I think it was the power of prayer that night.
Even the little bitty things, right? They listened to on that one. Pretty interesting.
It wasn't a life-threatening or major thing, but I think someone was listening to me that night in a little corner of a little airport.
Yeah, it definitely sounds. That's cool too, to know that even the little prayers get listened to. I think the key there was you humbled yourself. You know, you were like, listen, I know this isn't important, but I'm in a situation that I'm just totally out of my control. Could you help me?
It was.
You know?
Yeah, it was totally out of my control. That I think all of us are faced with those situations. They may not be the life-threatening situations, but they are things that are really important to us, and I think someone listens to us.
All right. There's no doubt about that. Okay. Well, you know, we are burning through the show here. We're already halfway over. We're going to take a short interlude here for myself and for the doc. If you guys got any questions, you can call in at 831-777-8643 if you want to call and ask him any questions. If you don't, we'll keep on rambling. Don't forget all of you podcast listeners out there, since I have so many of you now, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. This is a live show, and I would really love to hear from you guys when we tune in live. It'd be wonderful. I know you guys got schedules, and that's why you are the podcast crowd, but don't forget to catch us when you can. And, folks, we're on TalkStream Live, too. So you can listen to us via the TalkStream Live app as well. We're going to be right back with Dr. Scott J. Kolbaba. Stick around. I wanted to ask you about near-death experiences, if you've ever had any at all. I mean, not you personally, but have you heard anybody that's ever had near-death experiences?
Yeah.
Sorry about that silence, folks. I
have, Joe. You know, I've never had a near-death experience myself, but one of the things that first got me interested in writing this book was a story that one of my good friends told me, and it's interesting how we came about to talk about this. I was making rounds on one of the floors in the hospital, and he literally ran up to me and grabbed me and said, "Scott, I've got to tell you this incredible story." And I said, "Well, go ahead." This is Dr. Dave Mokel, who's a prominent orthopedic surgeon. And he said, "Well, I can't tell you here." And I said, "Well, why not?" He said, "Well, someone might hear us." So I said, "Well, why don't we go into an empty patient room?" And so he did, and he closed the door, and he said, I've got to tell you about this. And I said, "Well, who else have you told?" And he said, "Well, no one." And I said, "Well, why not?" And he said, "Well, they'll think I'm crazy." And he's an ordinary routine doc. You know, he doesn't have any, he's not one of these doctors that's on the fringe. He's just an ordinary routine surgeon. And he said, one of our mutual patients arrested on the operating table. And it turned out that the arrest was caused by the antibiotic that they had given her just before he was ready to start this surgery. And so she was basically dead on the operating room table. The eyes were closed, no pulse, no respiration. She was dead. And so when they call a code in the operating room, what happens is people from all the other operating rooms come and see if they can help out. And one of the first techs that came had bright red hair underneath his operating room cap, and he started to do CPR on our mutual patient, Mary. And so Dr. Mokel, who's in charge of the code, was checking the pulse to make sure that he was generating a pulse. Whenever they do CPR, you need to make sure that you're getting a pulse, you're actually perfusing the body, which is what you're trying to do. And he wasn't. So Dr. Mokel kindly asked him to step aside. He would like to take over the CPR himself. Well, the fellow either didn't hear him or didn't do it. And then he asked him again a little louder, "Please step aside. I want to start doing CPR because you're not getting enough perfusion." And he didn't step aside. So Dr. Mokel ended up pushing him. Codes are life and death situations. You can't be polite. You have to worry about saving the person's life. So the guy with the tech with the red hair stumbled away, and Dr. Mokel started to do CPR, and he was able to get a good perfusion of her body, and they gave her some medications, epinephrine and so forth, and she finally came back around. but didn't wake up until the next day. Her heart started and she was okay. And it turns out they found out that it was the antibiotic that caused that. And so after about 3 days more in the hospital, she was ready to go home, and Dr. Mokel was giving her the final instructions to taking care of her ankle, which is what they were going to be operating on, but they obviously had to stop the surgery. And she said, she blurted out, "Thank you for saving my life." And Dr. Mokel said, it was a humble doc, thanks, but, it was a team effort. Everyone pitched in, and the cardiologist and myself and so forth. And she said, no, thank you for saving my life. I saw you. When I arrested, I rose up to the top of the room and I could see everything that was happening. And I saw you push that guy with the red hair off to the side. And she described every detail of the code, of the whole procedure. Dr. Mokel had paged me because I was also the attending for this individual, Mary. And he kept looking at the door thinking I would be coming any time to help run the code. I wasn't in the hospital, so he didn't know that. And so she said, I saw you looking at the door after you'd paged Dr. Kolbaba multiple times. And by this point, Dr. Mokel had weak knees and had to sit down because he couldn't explain this scientifically. And then she said, my grandmother came to me when I was there, and she had died about 20-some years before. And she told me that if I was kind and considerate and a good person, I would have a special place. She would reserve a special place for her in heaven. And so Dr. Mokel just couldn't explain this. And what's interesting is when I saw Mary back in the office a few weeks later, she was the kindest, most gentle and considerate person that I've ever seen. And before that, she was nice, but she was kind of a little ornery at times. And it totally changed her personality. It was like Scrooge in the Christmas Carol. And Dr. Mokel, was afraid to tell anyone this story because it was such an amazing story and so bizarre that he was afraid that people would think he was a little crazy. But it really happened to him, and he still can't explain it scientifically. He thinks this was just a definite near-death experience, and it changed the life of Mary. She was a different person after that.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot on the show here because, as far as, I don't know what experiences you've had, but like out-of-the-body stuff and things like that, we talked about several books and different authors that have just witnessed those things. And I've actually even read online where, and I don't know if you've heard this, but where certain nurses put certain notes on the walls and stuff like that just in case someone actually does have an out-of-body experience. I don't know if that's true or not, but they have certain things that are unexplainable, and they do that to see if the patients saw it, which I don't know. I mean, have you guys had some experiences like that? Well, I mean, you're a general practitioner, so you're not actually in the surgery room all the time, but I'm sure you've heard of certain things like that,
The nurses have all kinds of incredible experiences like that. I don't have any in the book. I think my next book's going to be about nurses' untold stories. So if any of the nurses are listening out there, I'd love to have you log on to our website and send us your story. But the nurses talk about those kinds of stories, and those kinds of things happen. There's some really interesting things that happen when people are near death. As a matter of fact, one of the doctors, Dr. Messett, describes an experience he had with one of his colleagues. As a general practitioner, Dr. Cornell, he was good friends with Dr. Cornell, and he would meet with him every morning before rounds in the doctor's lounge, and they'd have a cup of coffee and a donut or something wonderful in the doctor's lounge, and they'd talk about fishing and their fishing stories. And one day, Dr. Cornell wasn't there. He had a massive stroke and was in the intensive care unit. So when Dr. Messett found that out, he went to see him, and he was in a coma. And the intensivist, the doctor in charge of the ICU, mentioned that, he was basically brain dead, and they'd be taking his ventilator off in about 3 days if there was no progress at all. And Dr. Messett was totally distraught and really didn't know what to do. He felt hopeless. He felt like he couldn't do anything. So he decided he would try to do something. And so he moved his chair closer to Dr. Cornell's, face, and he started to tell stories. He started to tell fishing stories. He told about a fishing story where he went up to Canada, flew up to Canada, and fished in the Mackenzie River for graylings. And they caught so many graylings he had sore arms. It was a catch and release kind of a thing. And he told him that story about flying in with a boat, landing on the water, being bounced around, and didn't want to take a pontoon boat, pontoon plane anymore, and all the details like that. Every day, Dr. Messett would go in and tell him stories, and Bob Cornell was in a deep coma, basically brain dead, and they were going to take him off the ventilator the next day and let him die naturally. So when Dr. Messett came in that next day, the room was empty. The bed was taken down, the lights were out, and he realized that he was too late. And so he asked the nurse, when did Dr. Cornell die? He must have died through the night, and when did he die? And the nurse laughed. And he was a little upset that the nurse would be so irreverent like that and laugh. And she said, well, he didn't die. He woke up yesterday, and he's now in the step-down unit. You can go down and see him. Well, Dr. Messett missed him in the step-down unit because he was down for other tests, but eventually, after about 2 or 3 weeks, he met him again in the doctor's lounge. And Dr. Cornell said, he was talking with kind of a broken speech because of his stroke that he had. He said, he told John Messett, he said, Dr. Messett, or John, thank you for telling me those stories. And he was talking like that. And Dr. Messett said, what do you mean? And he said, I listened to every story, and he could repeat back the story that he had told him every single day, despite being in a deep coma, almost basically brain dead, and he could hear those stories. And Dr. Messett wondered, if a person is so close to death that they can make a decision whether they should go and leave the earth or stay, whether his stories had an influence on keeping Dr. Cornell alive, because fishing was his great passion and his great love. And Dr. Messett's love for Dr. Cornell and telling those stories, he thinks may have just saved his life and helped him realize that there was something worth coming back to, and that he decided not to leave and come back.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing.
It is.
I don't have any words for some of this stuff, man, because it is amazing. It just validates all the stuff I've been reading. Journey of Souls by the psychiatrist, the hypnotist, Michael Newton. Journeys Out of the Body, obviously. William Buhlman we've had on the program. Those kinds of things. To hear that is really cool. But I mean, there's even stories of, and I don't know if this is true or not. Look, I read this stuff. I don't know if it's true, and I don't know if you've heard it or not. But where people are in the morgue and woke up. Have you heard? Did you ever hear about those? Like Buddhist monks or something like that were in the morgue. There's only been a couple cases in the entire history that this has ever happened, but the fact that it happened is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I can't explain that. I wonder if those people were really dead, before they were taken to the morgue, and you wonder how they were pronounced dead. That's one of the medical students and interns' great fears when you first become a doctor, that you're in charge of pronouncing people dead, and you want to make sure that they really are dead when you pronounce them.
Before the embalming fluid starts to get in there, yeah.
So you have to be pretty careful, and I was always worried. I'd do extra careful examination to make sure a person really was dead when the nurse called you to pronounce someone. So I can't explain those things except to say maybe they weren't dead when they were put into the morgue. That's all.
Well, I'm going to reiterate something, because when we came back from the break, I'd made an amateur boo-boo and had the cough button mashed. But you can visit the website at physiciansuntoldstories.com. All that stuff is right there on the website. If you click the links or the pictures, it'll take you to the book, too. And I got a copy here, and it's a good book. Really a good read, too. Did you have... I always wonder, because I think about writing my own book after doing all these radio shows and stuff. This is your first book, right? Is this your first book?
It's my first book. I'm a doctor. This is my sideline writing, and it takes a long time to write a book. I realized, like I said, I started out to do this in 6 months, and it took me 4 years. And what I did in writing the stories was, I wanted to find some good stories, so I would hang out in the doctor's lounge in the morning, and any doctor that would come in, I would pounce on and say, do you have a story for me? And
Yeah.
some of them had, again, some of these miraculous stories. And what we do then is I'd write down the information they gave me then, and I'd call them that next night or as soon as I could, and we get the whole detail of the story. And then I would write it out on my computer, and then I would call them again in a week or so when I could, and we'd talk about the story again, and I'd read them the story, and we'd correct all the errors and so forth, and get the details in what color the car was, and whether the day was a bright day or a cloudy day, or details like that I did get initially. And we do that about 3 or 4 times, and eventually I would get the story done. And then I would give it to my first editor, which was my wife. She's a great editor. And she would say things, irreverent things to me like, "This is not good enough. You need to go back and write this over again." And so I'd do that. And finally I would come down to, what I thought was a pretty good story. And, some of these stories would, even though I took the story down and I was writing it, I'd sit at my computer. I have tears in my eyes writing this story, even though I knew the story well, because they're so moving, some of these stories.
Yeah.
And then I would send it off. I had an editor. I would send it off to the editor, and they would edit, some of the grammar and things like that. And then you have a second editor too. After that, this is how you do things. I learned a lot about writing a book and publishing. And the second editor would look at the spelling and the punctuation and a whole host of things like that, and also correct some of the grammar again. And then you'd look at it yourself a couple more times and read it over. I read that book probably 50 times, I think.
Oh,
and
man.
I revised the stories maybe 15 or 20 times each. And finally came down with as good a job as I could, and then it would go to the printer and get it printed up. So there's a lot of work involved. And the fun work was interviewing the doctors and writing the initial story. The unfun work was, correcting the editors' comments and getting the lawyers involved. And, you have to have a lawyer read over the manuscript, too, to make sure that you're not, there's no legal issues with, can you mention Southwest Airlines, for example, in the book or not? Or there's a whole host of questions like that. So it gets to be really technical. But, I think when you come up with the final product, it really was worth it. And I still get a little teary when I read some of the stories. So these doctors have had some amazing experiences that are really moving.
Well, I can tell you this. It's a good read. There's a lot of books that I'll pick up and I'll get a little ways in and I'll put them down, But this one's, I got my bookmark here on, I wiped away a tear. The TPA had worked. His blood flow was restored to his brain. That's where I stopped. And I'm a pretty good fast reader, and this one's pretty easy to read. Anybody could read this book. It's not, you know what I'm talking about. When you pick up a book and it's impossible to read, you're like, I just can't get into it. This book, have you ever thought about doing an audio book after, a little ways down the road? Yeah,
we're talking with publishers right now that will publish the book eventually in a hard copy form and also audio books. And then maybe we'll talk about other books that I might be able to do, like a nurse's book too. So we're in the negotiation right now, and we'll see what happens.
I wonder after people have read your book, because I'm sure you get a lot of feedback, right? So
yes, yeah.
I wonder after people read your book, do they ever discover the miraculous things in their lives that they didn't realize that happened to them before?
They do. There are lots of people that have come back to me and said, after I read your book, I realized that there are some things that I've had in my life, and this happens regularly. That one story I mentioned about the girl in New York was the most prominent one that I can remember. But lots of people say, this gives me a whole new perspective on some of those coincidences that I've had in my life. I've had a few crazy coincidences that this book woke me up to also. There's one that was particularly unusual and moving. When I first wanted to get into medical school, my grades weren't really, really good in college. I really didn't have a direction. I was a little bit of a fool around. I still had B average, but, not great grades. And so I wanted to apply for medical school, and I needed to have organic chemistry as a prerequisite. And I had to take that at night school, because I had a job. And so I gave myself, I had a family at the time, so I gave myself only one more year to finish all these prerequisites. And if I didn't do that, I'd have to, get my a real good job and forget about my idea to go to medical school. Mm-hmm. So there are only two universities in the Chicagoland area that offered organic chemistry at nighttime. One was Aurora University, which is in the far west side of Chicago, and I was working in Aurora, which was perfect. So I could leave my job, go right to school, and it would be a easy thing to do, a relatively easy thing to do. And then the other one was Roosevelt University, which was downtown in Chicago, which was 70 miles away from where I lived. And so I got to the bookstore and bought the book. And there were lots and lots of books on the shelf of organic chemistry. And so I went to the class, and I discovered why there were so many books in the bookstore, because there were only 3 students in the class in Aurora University. And the professor walked in the first night, and I was excited because he would give me lots of attention. There were only 3 students in the class, and that wasn't the case. He said, "I'm sorry, we're going to have to cancel this class. There aren't enough students." And I was devastated because I could see my medical school career flying out the window, because if I didn't have organic chemistry, I couldn't get into medical school. So the next day I made some lame excuse to my boss, and I drove down to Roosevelt University to enroll in their night school class. Well, I got to the head of the line finally with the registrar, and I said, I'd like to enroll in organic chemistry. And she said, well, we have one class that we normally offer, but this year was exceptionally busy, so we opened up a second class, and that's filled, and we have about 10 or 15 people on the waiting list. And I said, well, you don't understand. If I don't get into organic chemistry, I won't become a doctor. My life will be a failure. And
everything's coming to an end right now. Yeah.
I could see the end. The end is in sight here. I couldn't believe it. So I said, well, I was desperate. I said, who can let me get into the class? Who can I talk to? And she said, only the professor. The professor's the only one at this point that can let you in the class. So I said, where's the professor? And she said, well, run up, he's upstairs in room 301 or something. And so I ran up the stairs, and in the waiting room there were all kinds of students, I think, waiting to talk to the professor because they had the same concern that I did.
They were trying to get this guy, right?
So, and my heart sunk, and I must have looked like a real sad sap to the secretary. It was fielding all these people that wanted to get into organic chemistry. And I said, I just need to talk with the professor for 3 minutes. And I promise if I can do that, I'll be out of your hair. And she finally agreed. She said, well, okay, the 2 professors that were teaching the class were in the professor's office. And if you go wait in the ante room right outside the door, when the other professor comes out, you can talk to the teacher. So I did. And, the door was paper thin, and I could hear everything that was going on inside. And what was going on inside was one professor would say to the other one, I don't know what we're going to do. We have a full class, and we don't have any books. We have books for the first class. When we opened up the second class, we can't find the books, the organic chemistry books, because there are none at the publisher's house. The publisher has no books. We called all kinds of institutions and universities in the area. No one has any extra organic chemistry books. And they were really upset.
What else is going to happen,
What's that?
So what else is going to happen, It just gets worse and worse, right?
So finally, the one professor left the room, and the professor that I had to talk to signaled for me to come in, and he was pretty bored because he was sick of talking to all kinds of people that were trying to get into the class. And I said to him, I'll be a failure in life if I don't do this. I've got to get into organic chemistry. And, he was pretty bored at this point and said, I'm really sorry. We've got 10 or 15 people on the waiting list and so forth. The same story I heard from the registrar. And then I thought, this is a desperate time. This calls for desperate measures. So I said to him, if I can get enough books for your class, will you let me get in? Now, all of a sudden, his eyebrows went up, and he started to pay some attention to me. And I thought, oh my goodness, I don't believe I said that. And my heart was, pounding in my throat.
Oh yeah.
And there was a silence that seemed like it was like hours. And he said, can you get me 30? And I said, more. And then my heart was pounding even faster. And I waited and waited and waited. And then he said, you're in.
Oh, man.
Did
you get his books for him?
I told him where the books were at Aurora University. They called the bookstore there. They got all the books and more than they needed, and everything worked out. But the bottom line in the story is, why was I there outside that room at the very minute what those 2 professors were talking about something that only I could help them with and only they could help me? And that was such a coincidence in my life that I didn't think anything more about that except it being a coincidence. After I wrote the book, I realized that wasn't a coincidence. Someone was trying to get me into medical school, and had I not been there at that very minute, I wouldn't have become a doctor.
Yeah.
And that was a coincidence that just is more than a coincidence.
Well, yeah, that's another one. It's making me think about all the coincidences in my life as well. You know, it's amazing how many all these people can have all these coincidences in their life. It makes you wonder, you know, when you hear about archangels and angels and stuff, I really believe we all have like a guardian angel, somebody that's looking out for us all the time that, you know, reports upstairs and says, hey, you know, Joe's having trouble or Doc's having trouble. We need to get this done, you know, and somehow or another they make it work out perfectly. It's just weird.
I think there is something to that. I think I don't know if it's an angel or God or what it is, but there's something, and the doctors, you know, most of the doctors felt that this was God looking after them and participating in their lives, sometimes on a daily basis even.
Now, you were talking about this on another show I was listening to, and I can't think of the name of it. I'll have to look it up because I hate to mention other shows and not put their names out there. And this is kind of a weird question, but the rain delay in the Cubs game, do you think that was a divine intervention for the Cubs? Somebody, how many people pray for the Cubs? Think about it.
I think, you know, there are millions of people praying for the Cubs. Everyone loved the hapless Cubs, you know, for 100 years not having any success. And I remember my wife's parents used to watch every single Cubs game. And there were lots of people that did that. And I'm sure there were tons of people praying for the Cubs. And I think, you know, maybe Ron Santo and Harry Carey upstairs had something to do with it too. So I think that rain, I was convinced that when I watched that game, before the rain delay, the Cubs were clearly way down. They were losing. And after the rain delay, they
tore it up. Yeah. It was Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio. That's what I was listening to when he asked you that. And I thought that was a cool question too, because a while ago you were talking about even the mundane things that are out of our control. You know, you got to think how many prayers go up in the sky for the Cubs, especially when they're in the World Series. And it's just like, come on, man, give these guys a break. You know, let them go through for once, please.
I think someone was listening. Yep, someone was listening that night.
Right. Now, you had a coincidence when you met your acting agent too, didn't you? I did. Yeah. When you write a book, you have to have someone that gives you some advice and helps you out and acts as your agent. And so I was looking for an agent and didn't know what to do. And so I was looking online at different websites for potential doctors that could help me with other stories. And I thought Ben Carson had a few stories in his book, and I was seeing if I could contact him to see if I could use one of his stories. Ultimately, I never was able to contact him. But it was interesting. I was looking on his website, and as I was scrolling down, there was a picture that appeared on his website. And I looked at that picture. I thought, I know that person. And I suddenly realized it was a former patient of mine who was a publisher who knew all the publishing business. And I saw that picture, and I thought, there's something to this. I better contact him. So I contacted him right away, and he ended up turning out to be a great help to me. He's been my acting agent and a great help in the whole book process. And without him, this book wouldn't have been possible. And it's interesting that there are multiple things that have happened to me in publishing this book and writing the book all along that give me goosebumps when I think about them. For example, I was trying to find a doctor that had retired because I knew he would have some stories for me. And I tried to find his address, tried to talk with friends, and no one knew his address. And I was pretty upset about that. And there happened to be a funeral for one of the doctors in the community, and I was at the funeral. And who should walk in the door but this doctor that I was trying to find? And there he was, and I could talk with him and get some stories from him. So those kinds of things are, those coincidental kinds of things happened all the time in writing this book. So I think someone else was helping me finish this book and helping me along the way. Now, where are you at on social media on here? Do you have a Facebook or a Twitter
Facebook,
or something?
Instagram, a little bit of Twitter, but mostly Facebook and Facebook mostly Facebook and Twitter.
What do we look up on Facebook? Do you know?
Physicians Untold Stories.
Okay. I'll have to, because I think this is important. This is something that really needs to get out there. I'll reiterate again. We all glued to the TV because, well, maybe not you, Doc, because you're busy, but most of us are glued to the TV all the time. And this is what we see. This is what we feel. We feel despair, like I'm going to get sick. It's just a matter of time for something like this happens to me. And then it's just up to pure science to help me. And this book proves that that's not always the case. It's science and spirituality together that have probably millions of people that it helped, And,
the doctors realize that. Many doctors realize that, but they're afraid to talk about it. And there are very few books like this because the doctors don't talk about these kinds of things. And I'm really very gratified that we were able to find about 30 docs that were really able to come forward and tell an honest story about some amazing experiences, because they do happen. And we should even expect to have some miracles in our own lives. They happen. They happen all around us.
Yep, there you are, physician. Okay, so it's facebook.com/physicians untold stories. Why? Is there any other reason why doctors would be hesitant to talk about this other than just their reputations? Maybe they just don't want to sound crazy, or...
I think that's the main one. If you went to a doctor and he said, I had a dream about you last night that you were going to have this particular illness and we need to do some tests, you'd think this guy's a little bit off. But I think, as we talk about this and as we get it out on podcasts and radio interviews and things like that, I think we're going to have more and more people that will approach a doctor and talk about spiritual things. And I think that was one of the things I hope that we would accomplish with this, and get people talking about religion and spirituality with their doctors, because it's an important part of most of our lives, religion and God and spirituality. And it plays a big role, I think, in healing, because like you mentioned, healing takes place not only with medicine, but also with the mind and with forces that are beyond our control, that like I said, most of the doctors would call God.
So did this change you personally, this whole experience?
I've always believed in a higher power. I'm a reasonably spiritual kind of person. But, when you hear these stories, and so many of them, it strengthened my faith that there really is something out there, that there is a God, that people that have died can participate in our lives, and that God does participate in our lives sometimes on a daily basis. So I think it has strengthened my faith a great deal, and I think the people that read the book also get additional hope and strength in their faith too.
We had the previous show, we had Daniel Joseph on, who's a mystic, and talks about how that voice that we have, how you always see the cartoon with the bad angel or the devil and the good angel, but that voice that we have that's always trying to tell us as clear as day, especially when something's right. You know, after this story, and especially this book and the things that, our audience has heard, we have to know as a fact that voice inside of us in our dreams and everything that we do is real. It's totally real. I know it doesn't seem that way because, everything is reality, but it's real and it's there. And you can't prove it. I mean, I'm talking to a doctor here. You still can't prove it scientifically, only but by numbers, right? So many coincidences, and that's it, Right. But
I think that's why I wanted to get so many doctors, because if it's just one doctor, you wonder, could this be a little made up? But, I have to have about 30 doctors come forward with stories that were so incredible. I wanted to make sure people could really believe this, and I think they are.
You know what made me trust doctors more than anything? You're not going to believe this, right? But I had to go see a shrink, right? I call him a shrink. That's probably a bad word for it, but I had to go see a psychiatrist, And at that time, I wasn't into, and I'm going to kind of take a little left turn, but I wasn't into paranormal things or anything like that, right? Yeah. And he wanted to talk to me about this stuff. I could tell he wanted to talk to me about it. So I started talking to him, and he told me that he was abducted and had experienced experiments run on him. And I'm thinking, oh, here we go. Now my shrink is talking. I think I should be his shrink, or a psychiatrist, because I just did not, at the time, okay, I did not believe what this man was saying. Yeah. And I definitely, at that time, whatever pills he was about to write me, I wasn't going to take them,
Yeah.
And he tells me he was experimenting on it. I've never told any of this. Dave, my best friends, nobody. But it made me think about this. I just remembered it. Mm-hmm. And he says they put some kind of thing into my leg, and they were telling me to, calm down and be peaceful. They're just here to help or whatever. And I'm thinking, yeah, whatever, right? Pulls up his pants leg, and sure enough, he has the craziest puncture wound I've ever seen in his life. It looked like a geometrical puncture wound that was perfect. And he said, this is where they put the instrument into my leg. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you could see it was clear. It wasn't a burn. It was like a perfect cut, And I was just wanting to mention that day, anytime a doctor's ever told me anything from then on out, I've always took their word for it, because I totally doubted. Of course you're going to doubt when somebody says something like that, Yeah. But he won't come on the show and talk about it. I've tried to get him to, but he just won't do it because, like you say, he's probably afraid that his reputation is going to go, down the tube if he says that.
Sure. Absolutely.
Have you got has anybody came to you and said, come on, like this stuff isn't real, you can't publish this book, or whatever?
When people read the book, there are so many doctors that have these stories that you may say, well, one or two may be questionable or whatever. I mean, people say that to me. I believe they're all true stories, but people say one or two may be questionable. But to have close to 30 doctors with amazing experiences makes it pretty credible for me. I don't think, and I've known these doctors for 30 plus years in many cases. And, these are doctors that are pretty ordinary, hard-working docs and have no reason to do this except to try to bring out what really happened to them and to help people. And then again, that's, like I said, these are some sappy do-gooders. One of the parts of the book, too, is about the doctors themselves, what I learned about the docs, because we never talk about these kinds of things among ourselves either. We talk about serum potassiums and a heart attack that somebody had, a mutual patient or whatever, but not these kinds of things. And I learned some amazing things about some of the docs and the experiences that they've had. I had one doc, Andy Rao, is a cardiologist locally, and I was talking to him on the floor, and we were just having a casual conversation. We were into adoption at the time, and I said that we've got this girl in Romania that probably will never be adopted because she got too close to a space heater with her plastic shoes on, and she burned her feet badly, and she'll never walk again unless she has multiple operations.
Oh my gosh!
And so that was kind of a sad thing, and so we went on and went our ways. About a week later, I got a call. And who was it but Andy Rao? And he said, Scott, I want to let you know we want to take that girl. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, we want to adopt her. And I said, well, you know nothing about her. Yeah, she could have all kinds of illnesses and diseases, and she's going to take multiple operations to fix her feet. He said, it doesn't matter. We can afford that. We've got insurance. And if this girl has a chance of being a normal person again, that would be its own reward. And so, and that's not unusual for the doctors that I'm associated with in many cases. Many of them would do the same thing. And so I got to label, I labeled them the sappy do-gooders, the card-carrying sappy do-gooders. And lots of doctors are that way, that they would sacrifice their time and efforts and money to help someone else. So this wasn't unusual. So it was kind of fun to talk about those kinds of things and to learn about what really makes doctors tick. And I put that in the book. There's a whole section on what I learned about docs.
About what they just, they won't talk about it. But you know what? I bet have a lot of doctors opened up to you since you wrote this book. More doctors than, that you write about that testified in the book. Have you had more and more come up to you and say, hey, this is what happened and this stuff happened to me too?
Absolutely. And they feel a little more comfortable in opening up to someone that's listened to all these stories. So I've had a number of doctors tell me some additional stories and learned about other things that doctors are doing. One of the local docs, for example, couldn't be in the operating room anymore. I told you about Dr. Jorgensen, who had the dream.
Uh-huh.
So he's now our county coroner. And a coroner's job is to certify the deaths in the county. So he certifies the cause of death for each death, so that if it needs to be investigated, if it's suspicious or something, he'll turn that over to the police. So that's his job. Well, he's a sappy do-gooder, and he realized 1 month that there were 16 deaths in our county alone from heroin overdoses, and he had to certify all those deaths. Now, these are young people. These are people that when a family loses a child, that's the worst tragedy that can happen to a family, losing a child. And so these are 16 families in 1 month alone. And he thought to himself, I've got to do something about this. So what he did is he went to our hospital medical staff, and we have a fund for various projects. And we gave him $10,000 to equip the fire department, the police, paramedics, anyone that goes into a potential house where there is a serious illness or tragedy, and these people then would inject a Narcan, which is a anesthetic, or a antidote, I should say, for heroin. And when if they caught the person soon enough after they had overdosed, they would wake up. And in the last 2 years, he saved 100 lives. It's more lives than I've saved in my whole career. 100 lives with this program. So talk about sappy do-gooder. This is a guy that is not supposed to be doing this, but took it on, and he's done amazing things. And now he's become an example. He was talking to the city of Chicago, and he travels all around talking about this program that he started because he wanted to do some good in the world.
Yeah, I see that a lot of the doctors now, I mean, not doctors, but even the police now, I think, carry around that stuff because there's so many. Yeah. What I think it's called naloxone or something like that helps them.
Right. Naloxone and Narcan, right.
Man, what do you think about that? I know it's off the subject, but doesn't it seem like that is just, as far as opiate addiction and stuff like that's completely gone out of control, or has it always been this way?
No, it's worse over the last few years because it's gotten so inexpensive. It's one of the most inexpensive drugs you can get on the street these days, and so lots of young people are using it. And there's a fine line between being high and overdosing when you stop breathing, which is what happens when you overdose on a narcotic, and then those people stop breathing and then they die, obviously. So it's a terrible problem, and it's very common, and it's an epidemic. And thank goodness we have people like Dr. Jorgensen that are trying to help in any way they can.
Yeah, that's something else. I hope that we can find. We need a real cure for that. Right now I think they're just they're doing things to substitute, which is anything will help.
Yes.
Except for the drug itself. Anything, but it's. I mean, I've seen it in my life. It's bad. And again, that goes back to if we would all believe in this higher power. I think, for instance, if you took everybody that prayed about one thing or meditated on one subject, and I've seen this with the monks and stuff where they will meditate, everybody will do something at a certain time of day, meditate and ask God or pray for help or whatever on this one subject, how powerful that does when more than one person is doing this, because this is something I think that we need a real fix for. And, your book shows us flat out that this stuff works, that, prayer works, spirituality works, Don't just think you're all alone. If you can get a group of people together, it's even more powerful,
That's for sure. That's for sure. There are studies now that where people pray for certain people in intensive care units, and then other people control subjects where they don't pray, and they found that even though they don't know who the person is, when they have a group of people that pray for them, they seem to do better than the people that aren't prayed for. So it's very interesting, and no one can quite explain that.
I had the same thing happen when I had this kidney stone. I felt like a little baby. You know, I got on Facebook and hit up all the Facebook groups and everything, and I, you know, in desperation, that's what you do, you know.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is the worst thing I've ever felt in my life. If any prayers or healing, whatever you guys believe in, please send it. I felt so selfish, but it was the worst thing ever. And I'm telling you, it wasn't maybe that night I started getting pain relief. Like, and it was still moving, but I think it broke up or something. I started getting a little bit more relief as it went. And I know that was part of it. And now I'm dealing with this gallbladder thing, you know, but I think I need to listen to what's going on with my body, Doc. You know, I don't want you to bill me for any advice, but once you start having one or more things go wrong with you, it's probably something you're doing, you know, probably something you're putting in your body, you know.
Well, come on up to Chicago. We'll have a surgeon see you and take care of you.
And I might do it. I'm ready to be done with it, you know. Now, do you guys, you know, we're coming towards the end of the show here, but I'm just wondering, since you wrote this book, you've got a lot of doctors and people that you know. Do you guys notice these things more now than you did before, as far as the doctors go?
I think the people that have participated in the book that really have bought into it, I think they do, and I think other people that read the book also are more aware. And I hear this all the time that people are paying attention more to the things that happen around them, and the miraculous things that they never realized were miraculous and they thought just were coincidental. So they are. I think people are paying more attention to this. And doctors too.
And the you know, another thing that I wanted to ask you again, because we talked about it a little bit, but I wanted to talk to you about the premonitions. Excuse me. I think that we all have this, and I really want other people to understand what you're talking about. These premonitions that doctors have, like the skier or whatever, it's not. Is it a small voice, or is it like an unmistakable, you know, roar that's inside of you that's telling you can't ignore this, you know?
Well, you know, I think we see both. Sometimes, though, some of these doctors had such a strong feeling that they just couldn't ignore it. There's a doctor that I got a story from that lives in Salt Lake, and he was an interventional radiologist. Gordon Brown is his name, and he had a patient that had delivered a baby before, then developed a blood clot in her leg, and they were giving her a clot dissolver. This was a few weeks after the delivery. They were giving her a clot dissolver through a vein in her leg to dissolve this massive clot in her leg. And this went on for about 3 days, is the usual course of this. And his day off was the third day that this girl was having this clot dissolver. And he was shopping with his wife in Salt Lake City, and this was his day off. And about the early afternoon, he began to feel really uncomfortable. And so he called back to the nurse that was taking care of this individual at the hospital. And he said, you know, I just have a funny feeling about this girl. Shut off her clot dissolver right now, and let's keep an eye on her. And then, as the afternoon wore on, he got a little more and more uncomfortable, and he called back and he said, is she doing okay? And the nurse said, yeah, she's doing fine. But he had this feeling that he had to go back and see her, and he just couldn't get it out of his mind. It was a strong feeling. And so he told his wife, that I can't shop anymore. And so they both got in the car. She was a little mad at him, I think, for canceling their shopping trip because doctors are kind of busy, and I don't think he ever did very much shopping with her. So he dropped her off at their house and then went back to the hospital. And, he said he was speeding at the time because he felt an urgency to get back there. But when he got back there, he ran up to the room. He was out of breath, and he said, how you doing? And she said, well, my leg is numb now. And he realized then that what had happened was she bled into her spine from the clot dissolver. And if you don't catch that right away, a person becomes paraplegic very quickly, and it's permanent, and they lose bowel and bladder control. So he immediately sent her off, called the neurosurgeon, sent her off to an MRI scan, and sure enough, she had a clot around the spine, a spinal cord. And the neurosurgeon took her right into surgery. Had he not shut off the TPA infusion when he did earlier in the afternoon, he wouldn't have been able to take her to surgery because she would have still had all this clotting medicine in her body. He evacuated the clot. Basically, the weakness and paralysis went away in her leg, and she did just fine. Now, what made him rush back to the hospital to find her in this condition and to shut off the TPA, I think, is that voice that just was an unmistakable roar in his mind. Now, we don't always get those roars, but when we do, and it's to do something good, I think we need to pay attention to that. But we get little premonitions of things, I think, all the time. Yeah. And if they're to do something good, I think we need to listen to some of those. But this guy, Dr. Brown, it was unmistakable. He couldn't help himself. He had to do what he did. And it was, he felt it was an amazing sense of urgency, and the voice, for him, the voice was a roar.
Right. Oh man, this is pretty cool. You know, I would want to ask you in finalization here, that what would you consider, you know, the main theme of the book, you know, because this book kind of takes on a life of its own, and it really does. And it seems to me that, like you say, love is the most powerful thing, but also that if we really set our mind to something, especially if it's a noble cause or something good, that all of a sudden these higher forces come into play.
You know, again, when you write a book like this, it's a whole collection of stories, and you never quite know what the bottom line and the main theme of the book is going to be exactly. But I think what I think it's turned out to show is that there's something else up there. There is a God. I think the doctors believe that pretty strongly. And you can believe whatever you want, but there's a force, there's something above that's higher than us. And this force or this God loves us unconditionally and participates in our lives more than we realize, and will help us do the things, the worthwhile things that we do. So if we take on a worthwhile goal, like my goal of getting to medical school, funny things begin to happen, and someone upstairs, God or this force, will help you accomplish the things that are worthwhile and that you really want to do. I think one of the other themes is that love is a powerful, powerful force, and that even people that have died that still love us can come back and help us in the things that we do. I think miracles happen regularly. I think we should count on them sometimes to help us with the things that we do. And I think that the people that serving other people benefits us more than the people that we serve. And I think the doctors would attest to this also. So I think those are some of the themes in the book, but I think the big theme is that there's something else out there that loves us and that wants to help us through this difficult life.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And I appreciate you coming on the show, Doc. It's been really cool. I can't wait to see more stories by you, especially your book that you're talking about, the nurses one. That's going to be pretty cool, because I have a lot of friends that are nurses, and they tend to tell me lots of stories. I might actually have a few of them hit you up, as a matter of fact, if you're looking for some stories.
I'd love that. Have them go onto our website and send me some information. We'd be glad to call them up and get their story.
That's no problem. And thanks again for coming on the show. It was really cool talking to you.
Thanks, Joe. It was a pleasure.
No problem. Well, that's it, guys. We're at the end of the show. It went by really, really quick. The book name, again, is Physicians' Untold Stories, Miraculous Experiences Doctors Are Hesitant to Share with Their Patients or Anyone. And you can check this show out on the website at lightingthevoid.com. You can also check it out on Amazon. All the links go there to Amazon, and at physiciansuntoldstories.com, and look them up on Facebook too. Same thing, physiciansuntoldstories.com. And yeah, this was really cool. I'm glad we did that. And tomorrow night we're gonna bring back Chad C. Meek, and don't forget to sign up for the newsletter on the website. And yeah, I gotta say it again. Happy birthday, Deb. Miss Cruz, you're the best. We love you, and we will see you guys tomorrow night. It's been a real pleasure. Thanks for listening, guys.